What's going on, guys, and welcome to today's video. And as you can tell, we are back in not my garage, but my buddy John's garage with his 997.1. And today we're going to be doing a pretty cool driver's mod, and we're going to be putting a Momo Alcantara wrapped steering wheel on this thing. So we're going to be pulling the factory airbag, the factory steering wheel, bolting a hub on and wiring, and then finally bolting that Momo steering wheel on. So I'll show you the cool new parts that he's got and the custom parts, of course, because it's him and he can't have anything normal off the shelf. So let's take a look at these parts and then we will jump into this thing and see how hard or not it is to pull this Porsche steering wheel. All right, guys, so as you can see, we've got the Momo Mod 7 steering wheel here. And of course, he couldn't just leave it with the normal leather. He had this thing rewrapped in a stone gray Alcantara with yellow stitching, obviously to accent the factory stone gray Alcantara headliner, and of course you guys saw the yellow cage and the yellow Black Forest Industries shift knob. And another really cool touch is that horn button is of course the same matching Alcantara, but it is embossed with the Porsche logo. We've got our hub here and our wiring harness so we can not have a airbag light on and our horn will still work. So we'll jump into this thing and see what we need to do to get the airbag off, the steering wheel off, and get all of this bolted on. So I'll throw you guys on the tripod and we'll see what we can do. So now that we are inside, the first thing we did long before we opened the door and got in this thing was disconnect the battery. We waited a while so the capacitors would discharge in all of the computers so we could safely handle the airbag. You don't want to chance it. Go ahead, disconnect the battery and let it wait. Now, one thing you don't want to do is turn the steering wheel very far at all because it will lock, and then the only way to unlock the steering wheel will be hooking that battery back up, because if you put the key in and try to turn it to unlock the steering wheel, it's not going to unlock because there's no battery power, and the key is then going to get stuck in the ignition, obviously, until you get the battery hooked back up. So battery's disconnected, we are safe to start playing with the airbag. And what we've got is a 3/16 Allen, and we've got a open hole here on the bottom of the steering wheel shroud. And what you're going to need to do is push that Allen key up in, and it's kind of hard. You're going to kind of feel and fish around. What you're feeling for is a metal spring, and it's going to be kind of a spring tension resistance to it, and you're going to find that and push up. And just like that, that airbag popped out and we are ready to pull the airbag out. Now that we've got the airbag folded back out of the way, you can see the airbag connector, and there is just one little tab here in orange up at the top that you will need to pull down and then remove the connector. And once you get that tab pushed down, connector's unplugged and the airbag can safely be pulled out of the vehicle. Kind of cool with Porsche is that you do have that intermediate connector for both the horn switch and both of the airbag inflators, so it kind of all comes out as one nice piece. Now next we've got the main steering wheel nut or bolt, and I believe it is called a triple square. It's kind of like a Torx, but there is a few more sides to it. So guys, I've got a impact here with that triple square bit, and I am going to use the impact because if I was just trying to use a ratchet, it would be turning the steering wheel, and again, we're trying not to turn the steering wheel and cause it to lock. So I'm going to kind of stabilize the wheel with my knees and hopefully rattle this nut loose. And just like that, we've got that nut off. And we're gonna wanna set this thing aside because we are going to reuse this with our aftermarket hub. And luckily, the Porsche steering wheels are not a press fit or are not super, super tight on there, and they will just slide off once you get that big center nut off. Which brings us to the clock spring. Now this is a clock spring, or a spiral cable. Different manufacturers call it different things, but you do not want to turn this after you've pulled the steering wheel off, because if you get this turned any amount, the steering angle sensor will be off, and if you continue to turn it, you can break the ribbon cable that is in there. So it's very, very important that A, you started with your wheel straight, and B, you do not move this once you've got the wheel off. So we've got our hub now with our wiring harness, and you're going to want to get the wiring harness installed before the hub goes on. And the wiring harness is only a 6-pin connector, and if you notice, your clock spring is a 12-pin connector. So definitely consult with your hub instructions or your wheel instructions, whatever your wiring harness came with, because it can go on in multiple different ways, and it can even go on left and right, upside down. There's just a lot of ways to do it. So consult the instructions and know which way you need to go, since you are messing with an airbag light. Now, of course, you're not going to set an airbag off if it is installed wrong, but you're going to have a warning message on the dash that you're going to have to deal with. So this specific one, we've got 2 resistors for our airbag squib circuits, and we've got our horn switch wiring on this side. And of course, we looked at our instructions, and we know that we need to install this in the top row of pins with our horn switch wiring off to the left. So we are installed as we should be. Now the hub, I'm sure hubs are different. This does have a little top 12 o'clock dot that is telling us where it needs to go. Now Porsche does not have a master spline on the hub or steering shaft, so you can have this thing off left or right or perfectly centered by a few degrees. So you may need to watch it, but worst comes to worst, if you had to pull the steering wheel and move it 1 spline over, that could be done. Or you could always install this and have a alignment checked and have that steering wheel centered to the front wheels. But a couple different ways to go about it and do it. But we've got our wiring harness installed, so we are going to put the hub on again with our 12 o'clock dot facing straight up. So we will feed all of our wiring through the top hole. And again, we started with our steering wheel very straight, so we know we want that 12 o'clock dot as 12 o'clock as possible. So you may need to kind of play with it a little bit and figure out what is best. Now, if I have it on 1 spline, I am maybe a shade to the left, and if I move 1 spline over, I am maybe a shade to the right. So again, you may have to play with it a little bit. You may have to, again, align the vehicle, have the toe straightened to the steering wheel, but at least you are very, very close to begin with. So now that you've got that hub in the 12 o'clock position, or the closest spline to that 12 o'clock position, it is time to throw that steering wheel nut back on, or bolt in this case. And it does have a torque spec, which is relatively low at 37 foot-pounds. So we will see what we can do to tighten it down and then get it to torque. Now you may have to wait to do your final torque until that steering wheel is bolted on, so you can have a little more leverage, because you're obviously going to have some issues trying to torque it with only holding onto the hub. But with a aftermarket steering wheel, you've got the big center horn button area still open, so you can have somebody else hold the wheel while you torque it to do that final spec. But we've at least got the bolt tightened down on the hub, so we don't have any play in it, so we can go ahead and proceed with steering wheel install and then finally checking that torque. So we are now ready to throw that steering wheel on, but before we do, we are going to kind of nicely tuck the airbag light resistors into the hub, and then we're left with our 2 horn wires. Now we've got our 12 o'clock position facing up, which corresponds to our steering wheel with the top 12 o'clock screw hole. So we'll get all of our steering wheel Allen bolts in, and then we will start playing with our horn switch. Once you get that steering wheel bolted on, you could kind of check for clearances, and now you may find out you may want to add a spacer or take a spacer out, you know, extend, whatever you might need to do for your application. This one's a little bit close to the controls, but I mean, it's still going to work really good going down the road. But again, everybody's going to sit differently. Your arm positioning is going to be different. So everybody may have to do a little bit something different. Now that we've got the steering wheel bolted on, in this case, we are left with just the horn switch, and there's going to be a bunch of different applications depending on what style of steering wheel and the wiring and the horn switch and all of that. But at least in this application, we've got the single wire here, and then we ground to the outside of the horn switch. So this one is pretty straightforward. We hook up our single wire, and then we are going to install that horn switch. And just like that, we've got a really, really awesome looking wheel, and it completely changes the look of this thing. It makes it look way more race car, way more custom or different, or just a little more unique than every other car out on the road. So the only other thing left is hooking that battery up and turning the key on, looking for any warning lights, and making sure everything works like it should, making sure your turn signals cancel, making sure the horn works, all of the stuff that you kind of had apart. Well guys, it was a pretty straightforward install. As you guys saw, that wiring harness took care of the airbag light being on since we had the airbag unplugged. And as you can tell, our horn even works. So hopefully this gives you guys a little bit of a run through, at least specifically on this Porsche, but the install should be relatively similar on pretty much any maker model. Now, obviously the airbags are all gonna come out differently. There's gonna be a different center bolt or nut holding the steering wheel on, but this is pretty much the install for any hub or aftermarket steering wheel that you might be doing on a vehicle. So we'll take one more quick look at the finished product, and gosh, does it look really, really good with the matching Alcantara, obviously with the headliner, and the yellow stitching ties in with the shifter, ties in with the cage. It just looks really, really good in here. And like I said, with the bolt-on style steering wheel, you can always go in and add spacers or remove spacers or put a quick release hub on. There's just a lot of different things you can do with this style of steering wheel. So guys, thanks for coming along on another Porsche video, and thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time.